If you're like me, you hate it when a website takes over scrolling. You try to scroll and it just doesn't let you do what you want. But what I do like is when there's these little scroll snap points where if I scroll past a section, it might snap back just so I make sure I kind of hit that section. This is especially helpful for like full page scroll views to where you have different sections on a landing page, for instance, and you can just track along with that. Now, there are a couple gotchas here, especially when it comes to accessibility and kind of that scroll jacking behavior when it comes to a touch device. So we're going to talk about just an overview of how all the scroll snapping stuff works, and I hope this will be a big help. Let's jump in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public, where I teach through what I'm learning in web development. Now, recently I was talking with a dev friend about kind of having this scroll snap behavior and how you could do it for a full page view like this. Now, there are a couple of gotchas here, and you really need to make sure you pay attention to accessibility and a few other things that can kind of be hangups. But what I've got is just a basic Vite project, and you can grab the code in the description, but I've added this host flag so that way we can run it locally on a mobile device or something like that. So now I can just do npm run dev. And if you haven't installed the dependencies, you'll have to first do npm install, and then you can do npm run dev. But you'll see that it now spins up an actual network here, so I can grab this on my phone a little bit later in the video. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and close this down. You can see that we've basically got one wrapper here, this scroll wrapper, and inside of here are 5 sections. So let's go ahead and start working on the CSS. And I've got these 2 sections down here. Let's go ahead and just add a height here. We'll just do 100% VH, so that's the view height. So it always should take up the full view height. Now, you might also want to do a dynamic view height, which is a newer unit. So things like mobile devices won't count the scroll bars. So they'll only take up the visible view height essentially. And if you put this afterwards, if it doesn't support it, if the browser doesn't support it, it'll just fall back to this. So that's what I'm going to do right here. All right, now what we need to do is set the children to take up that full height of their parent. So I'll say height here of 100%. So they'll take up the full height of their parent. So I can tell it how it should scroll within this container by using the overflow Y property. This is Y because we're talking up and down. So I'll set this to scroll, and now you'll notice that it still has that scroll bar here, but it's always going to have it, even if the screen shrinks or that kind of stuff. All right, so with that said, how do we kind of cap this so that it can scroll and snap to different sections? Well, all you have to do is on the wrapper, that's on the parent, you can set something called the scroll snap type. And there's actually 2 sections to this. There's the first position here, which is set to Y, that would be just scrolling up and down, or X, that would be left and right. You can also use the logical properties, block, that would be for up and down for most languages, or inline, or you can also just do both. So either way, it should scroll snap like this. What I'm going to do is just set it to Y. So that's the first. The second thing you need to declare is whether or not it's mandatory or proximity. So mandatory means it has to basically snap to sections. Proximity means it only will do it if it's close to it. All right, proximity like this. All right, so let's go ahead and set ours to mandatory to start with, and I will go ahead and save it here. Now notice if I come here and I let go, nothing much is going to happen, right? So nothing is really happening. What you have to do is set something on the children as well. So with this one property set to the parent wrappers, now on the children wrappers, I want to set a scroll snap align. I have to tell it, hey, how should it snap when it snaps? And I want to set this to start. So now notice if I come like this and I release, it'll actually snap back up and it snaps to the start of the entire section. Now notice it does it to the closest one. So here it jumps down to 2. If I get more than halfway up on the first, it jumps up to the first. Now there are other options here as well. So you can come in here and say center and it will snap to the center of the section. You could also say end, or you can say none, which is the default. Now there is a really important gotcha here, and that is that if you have this set to mandatory here and the scroll snap align here not set at all, which is none, the default, or set to none, either of those, the user cannot scroll this into view if it's like outside of the size of their viewport. So you really want to make sure that you set this here. So kind of view these as both important. So if you set this one, you've got to set this one. And I would typically set it to something like start, right? Because if it's always set to center, then they may not be able to scroll to the top. You just want to make sure you test this on any device size you might be interested in. Now, one other note here about the mandatory before we talk about a couple of other options. This creates a very consistent scrolling experience, so you know the browser is always going to snap to each defined point. However, it can cause problems if the content is larger than you expect. So again, if it's larger than the actual viewport that they're currently on, they may never really be able to scroll there without it snapping back, and it can be really frustrating for them. In fact, it could be that they can't even quite scroll there. So again, just test this on all your devices. And if you're not sure, go ahead and just make sure you set this to proximity like this. And that way, if they stop like in the middle right here, it won't snap anywhere, right? So they can scroll freely. It's just when they get really close that it will then snap down. So if you're not sure how much content is on the screen or in the scrollable section, I would just recommend using proximity unless you're really certain that mandatory will work for you. Now, there are some situations where you might have like a banner up top here. So if I were to come up top, maybe we can add something like that. We could just have like I don't know, let's have a nav. and we'll have something in here. All right, perfect. All right, so let's come down this way. We're going to grab this nav here. We'll say the height, which you should not set a height like this manually, but that's okay. We're going to do it in this case. And then we'll set this to position of fixed. All right, because what I want to do is actually set it kind of over the front of all the rest of this content. Now, just to make sure we can see it clearly, let's set a background color here, and let's do something like that. All right, so that way it's over the top. And finally, we'll set the width to 100%. All right, so no matter where we're at, it's always at the very top. Now, you see the trouble, don't you? As I snap, it's actually hiding part of the section. Well, there's a really cool little utility you have with this scroll snap type where you can tell it what kind of padding should be available. Now, you always set this on the parent, and the parent then controls how it scrolls the children within this, so it'll actually add the padding for you. Now, perhaps just to make this really clear, let's add a border here of 2 pixels, solid and red. And that way you kind of know what the parent is. It's actually behind this right here. You can't even quite see it because of this. So if I were to get rid of this, now you can see there it is. All right, but over here, now we kind of know where that lands. And again, just for clarity's sake, let's add a background color. Let's do something slightly lighter here. Now, as I scroll from position to position and it snaps to the right section, I want to be able to see that right there. So how do we add that padding? Well, it's with something called the scroll padding. Now, notice all these options here. You've got padding top, just padding in general, so you can set it for all 4 sides. Block, these are logical properties. Block end, that's essentially the bottom. This is block start, that would essentially be the top in most languages, etc., etc. So in this case, I'm just going to set it for my padding top. And I can set it to this exact height right here, right? So I can just say I want it to be 50 pixels. Now, here's what's going to happen as I go to snap. So it'll snap here. It actually leaves 50 pixels up top. And then there's this 50 pixel gap up top. Now, let's also do the same thing here where we actually add a background color on the children. That way we can see exactly what we've got. We'll set 577, all right, whatever that happens to be. And then maybe let's come in here and add something on each nth child. So I'll take the nth child. And now that we've got native nesting in CSS, I'm just going to do it like this. We'll say that on all the even ones. Let's copy this down and change this slightly. Let's say like 3, 3, and 2 or something, all right? Something nasty. All right, there we go. So different colors on each of these sections. So we've set padding on the parent. You can actually also set something else on the children. And for the children, you're going to use something called the margin. Now, what this will do is basically allow for different amounts of space for each of the children elements that can be used in conjunction with this padding, but they don't have to be. So in other words, you might have different needs for each child, and that's where you would use this scroll margin. Once again, you have all the same options available to you. I'm just going to use scroll margin generally like this and set it to something like 50 pixels on all of these. All right, so here we go. You can see we've got these sections. Notice I've got the padding, and then I've also got these 50 pixels right here. So that's the extra kind of child section that's giving me extra margin. Now, because it's margin, it's not including the background color here, right? It's actually pulling from whatever's next to it. In this case, another child. Now, just to show that we can do this differently for each individual element, I could come in here and say that this one should be something like, I don't know, let's do 100, not 1,000. So now as I scroll down here, you'll notice that I have 100 on this one, but if I go to the next one here, I should only have the 50, right? This right here. Maybe to make it more dramatic, we'll just do the 20, which means you can't even quite see it on that first one, right? So you have to kind of pay attention how you do these because you can get yourself in trouble, like this right here, where I've actually set a margin that's kind of conflicting with this padding top and leaving the space that we can't quite see everything. But just to note that the margin is set on the children. You can flex with each of them and kind of set them individually. The padding is set on the parent. Now, let's go ahead and back out of this right here, and we'll also back out of this right here. Now, before we talk about mobile devices, I do want you to note just one thing. You'll notice that it is snapping properly, right? But this top section right here isn't quite working, right? Because this very first one actually is still trying to line to the top, and there's no extra padding at the very top. So you can actually set this a little bit differently if you want. You could do like a padding top of 50 pixels. And that way the first one is always set off like that, and then all the rest of these are as well. So the first one uses this, all the rest of these are using the scroll padding top of 50 pixels. All right, the last thing is how to set the scrolling on mobile devices. For that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my phone and then also show you here on the side. Now here what you're actually doing is setting something on each child saying whether or not it should stop when you're trying to scroll. So naturally, if I go ahead and scroll, I can just scroll all of them immediately, and when the device stops scrolling, it'll snap to the closest one. However, you may want to force people to stop at each section. And you can do that here with a property called scroll, snap, stop. Now here you're saying always or normal. Always means it has to stop no matter what. Now, if I look over here on the desktop device, nothing is going to change, right? I can just scroll right through all these, that's fine. But when I look at my phone, as I start to flick, it'll actually stop at each section. Doesn't matter how hard I flick, it forces me to stop at each of these sections. Now, this is one of those behaviors I don't super love, so I just want to tell you about it, but maybe don't use it unless you have a really good use case for it. In other words, you're preventing people from actually scrolling your page. They have to stop at each of these little waypoints. That's really everything you need to know about scroll snapping in just a few minutes. Hey, well, I hope that was a huge help. Once again, my name is Chris, and I love teaching through what I'm learning in web development. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.